By show of hands, how many of you have taken on a spiritual discipline this Lent? Any in the choir? There's some in the choir. Oh, I saw some hands shoot up when I turned around. By show of hands, how many of you have ever taken on a spiritual discipline for Lent? All right, more hands have gone up. Looking back to the choir again. Even more hands there this time. And finally, by show of hands, how many of you have taken on a spiritual discipline for Lent and failed to do it? I'm guessing it's the exact same number of hands that just went up the last time. Last year for Lent, I was all excited because I was going to do the Christ walk, or I was going to do daily devotions and get 10,000 steps in a day. I'm a fairly active person, at least in heart. And I figured 10,000 steps, that can't be too hard. And Ash Wednesday came, and after the final service, Ash Wednesday, I got home and I checked my pedometer, and it said I was about 1,500 steps short. So I just did laps around my living room until I got 10,000 steps in. And I was like, this is starting off to be a good Lent. I'm going to do this. That Thursday, by the time I got home and got ready for bed, it was about 9,400, somewhere around there. Not quite 10,000, but close enough that it would be okay, and I'd just get extra steps in the next day. Well, the next day was Friday, and Friday is my day off. And by the time the day ended and I went to check my pedometer, I'd gotten all of 2,000 steps in, which the mathematicians among you may realize is nowhere close to 10,000. And I went about and probably averaged 5,000 steps a day for that entire season of Lent last year. So I didn't meet my goal. This year I figured I'd do something a bit simpler, and I would just do Lent Madness, which is wonderful and hilarious, and you get to learn about all these holy men and women that have gone on as examples to us before of how to live a life according to God's will. And it was going great, and I was having fun, even though my bracket's completely busted because St. Cyril lost in the first round. He was supposed to win the Golden Halo. But I was still following along until this past Friday comes along, and again, it's my day off, and I'm relaxing. And I can only tell you that Rock beat Gertrude because I had to put it on the bracket that's out in the parish hall so you all would know who won the match. And I didn't pay attention to it at all. I don't know who St. Rock is. I don't know who St. Gertrude is. I couldn't tell you a thing about them except I think St. Rock is a patron saint of dogs. That's about it. So 2 years in a row, at least, I've done a Lenten discipline, and I have failed in my Lenten discipline. And I'm sure by now you're all wondering, why are you talking about Lenten disciplines, and why are you talking about failing at Lenten disciplines? Well, it especially was brought home to me when I was reading Paul's letter to the Philippians, when he starts out with an urge to imitate him and to observe the leaders in the community who are setting an example to how to live a life according to God's plan. And who would those people be for us, if not the holy men and women that we are honoring and remembering in Lent Madness? All humor aside, we're looking at people who have lived exemplary lives and have set an example for us. And we should observe them and find ways that we can live our own lives accordingly. So I was a bit disheartened to find that the very passage I was going to preach on is to do the very thing I failed to do. But then I was looking at the other readings, especially the Genesis reading, and realized that God doesn't always work the way we want God to work. We tend to think that God's going to work just like this. And at this time, in this place, God's going to do something great. And it's going to look the way I want it to look. But that's not always the case. Abram wanted something simple. He wanted someone to inherit what he had. And he's gotten to old age, and there's no one to inherit but a slave born in his household. He's distraught because all he wants to do is to have his own son. And he's despondent and cries out to God that there's no one to inherit what he has to give. But then God comes and makes a promise and takes Abram outside and says, look at the stars and count them if you are able. That's how many descendants you will have. Abram wanted one son. And now he has all of us as descendants of Abraham. You know, there were the Israelites in bondage in Egypt, crying out for being in slavery. And God took 500 years to hear their cry and send Moses to deliver them. And then they spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness, and not one person who was a slave in Egypt made it to the promised land. God works in our lives, but not always in the way we envision it happening. Then we get to Jesus, who's casting out demons and curing the sick. And he gets this message from the Pharisees that we hear this morning in the gospel. And his response back, when he tells the Pharisees to tell Herod, is, I'm going to continue to do my work. Today, tomorrow, and on the third day, my work will be finished. And you and I have about 2,000 years of history to know that that's an allusion to the resurrection. And we also know that when Jesus said that his work would be finished, he didn't just mean that 2,000 years ago an act would happen and that was it. But he meant finished in the terms of being perfected, completed, 100% whole. And that each and every day we have an opportunity to see God being perfected in our lives. That's why Lenten disciplines are so important. Because it's the one time in the year that the church actively says, we are setting aside this time to come back to God, specifically. We have gone astray, but let's return to God with penitent hearts. So for those of you who have not taken on a Lenten discipline this year, I urge you to do something. And for those of you who have taken one on and who have fallen away, take heart. There are always opportunities to grow closer to God, to be repentant, and to come back and find the way that God has set for us. I invite you to join me in this journey, in seeking ways we can be closer to God. And as I told the kids in the children's sermon 2 weeks ago, when we put the A word we're not allowed to say in Lent in that box, we will come to Easter Sunday more closely related to our God and Creator. And that celebration of the resurrection will not just be a celebration of an historical event that happened some 2,000 years ago, but it will be a celebration of what's going on in our hearts each and every day. I pray you come to know God in your hearts more fully this Lent. And when we celebrate the resurrection on Easter Sunday, we all can cry out, in a loud voice. That word I can't say right now, but you all know what it is. And we cry that out with such enthusiasm and passion because the resurrection is part of ourself, our soul, our body. Amen.
Bunch of new fans this year who hadn't been around Lent Madness before, which is wonderful. So we posted the Lent Madness, the 10 Commandments of Lent Madness to help people.
Right, and where again would people go if they wanted to read the 10 Commandments of Lent Madness?
They would go to their nearest courthouse and find a 10 Commandments monument outside, carved in stone. Yeah. Or they would go to www.lentmadness.org.
Right, and I wholeheartedly believe that you should memorize all 10 of the commandments, but we can also distill that into the Lent Madness Great Shema.
That's right. And so, Tim, which of these commandments is the first and the greatest commandment of Lent Madness?
First and greatest commandments of Lent Madness are, first, that Lent Madness is optional. And
the second one is, if you don't like the world's greatest online Lenten devotion, start your own.
Excellent. So the Great Shema of Lent.